Okay, good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. This morning, I'm really thrilled and honored to have with me as my guest Alok Sama, who's a writer, investor, board member, recent author of his new book, The Money Trap. Alok, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Richard. Pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm really honored you're here. I saw you present recently with Max Levchin at the Battery. It was a standing room only presentation, so I really appreciate your speaking with me on this podcast.
Well, I'm delighted you want to speak to me even without Max by my side.
For sure, for sure. Well, I want to start actually at maybe a place that you don't get asked about much. I
Yeah,
went to Caltech and I saw you were a math major, which always
yeah.
intrigues me. Tell me a little bit about that and why you chose that major in the first place.
Yeah, I love that question, by the way. Rewinding to my days in high school,
Yeah.
I think probably the only useful. I went to high school in India, by the way, in New Delhi.
Uh-huh.
I grew up in India, and first 21 years of my life, I don't
Uh-huh.
think I actually traveled even within India much beyond New Delhi, which is my hometown. And I think the most useful thing I learned in high school was Shakespeare. I used to read obsessively. It was my thing. But funny enough, the thing that came easiest to me was math as a subject.
Yeah.
And in India, this is kind of modeled after the British system. You don't have, liberal arts programs where you go in without declaring a major and, kind of figure out in a couple of years what you really want to do. You had to choose what you wanted to do. And for a guy to even think about, kind of becoming a writer. I mean, my parents were middle class. My father he was a scientist, a very low paid scientist at a research hospital, government owned. And,
Mm.
the pressure to make a living kind of, priorities now 1 through 10. It was all about that, right? So writing really studying something like English literature wasn't really an option. And math came easy to me. And as a math major, I found it the most straightforward path to get into one of the most prestigious colleges, other than the Indian Institutes of Technology in the country, which is a place called St. Stephen's College. So that's how I came to be a math major. And it was people assume that I'm good with numbers. Funny enough, and hopefully you'll relate to this. If you're studying pure mathematics, I don't recall my 3 years in college looking at a single number. That came with the Wharton School and finance. And I talk about the story about how I actually accidentally stumbled on the world of finance. But that's kind of how I came to be a math major.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
was described in the book. I was absolutely fascinated by number theory and this obscure thing which is being cracked since then, Fermat's last
Of
theorem. I really thought
course.
for a while that I
Yes.
could crack it,
Yeah.
and that was kind of my thing in my college days.
That's so hilarious. Well,
Yeah.
were you thinking that you would actually be a mathematician, or when you got the math major, did you have, what kind of career goal did you have at the time?
No, like I said, I really did think I had a shot at cracking Fermat's last theorem,
Oh, interesting. Wow.
and while everyone around me was doing what kids do in college, which is getting drunk and chasing women. I mean, not to suggest that I did try that too. I just wasn't very good at either. but but that's a little bit of what I did, and so I did want to become a mathematician. And
Wow.
my father he was a scientist. Didn't really kind of understand studying math where that would lead me, and he connected me to someone he met accidentally, someone who he thought was a mathematician and sort of was, and introduced me to him, and that's sort of the opening of my book. Well, the opening is quite dramatic. It's me meeting with a couple of Mossad agents at Claridge's Hotel in London, but chapter one is a little bit of an origin story and starts with me meeting this gentleman who, again, my father thought was a mathematician, but turned out to be someone who taught statistics and operations research at the Wharton School, which I'd
Mm,
never heard of. Again,
mm.
this is the mid '80s, and my contact with, other than a few random movies, mostly spaghetti westerns with Clint Eastwood. That was kind of that's all I knew about the United States. Never heard of the Wharton School. Vaguely heard of Harvard and Stanford, perhaps,
Wow.
this gentleman, Dr. Gupta, as I described, suggested that I think about doing an MBA in finance, and that's how I ended up at the Wharton School.
Wow.
and eventually at Morgan Stanley.
Interesting. Well, tell me how I noticed in between there, it looks like you got a master's in creative writing. How does a math major with an MBA decide to do creative writing? That seems like a very non sequitur.
So that's connecting the dots. I mean, this is like a lifetime apart, right? So I graduated from the Wharton School in 1986. My MFA, so my MBA, I was 23 when I finished my MBA. I started my MFA when I was 58, right? So I
Interesting.
graduated last year. So this is after leaving SoftBank. It was a case of it's probably already late, but hopefully not too late. And I wanted to kind of get this bug inside me that, look, I mean, if you ever want to write, if it's something that you think you could be good at, it's a case of now or never.
Yeah,
And
interesting.
so even while I was at SoftBank, I was looking at these MFA programs. I wanted to be in New York. I mean, that is where that's the writing community in New York City. The literary scene is really vibrant. So I applied to an MFA to Columbia and NYU, got into both, and chose NYU mainly because of the lineup they have of some of the finest literary minds in the country, actually,
Hmm.
in America. And
Wow.
I did go. By the way, people assume I went in with the intention of writing this book. That's not true at all. I mean, I
Hmm.
did not think I would end up writing kind of a. This isn't really an executive memoir if you read the book, but I didn't think I would write a memoir. But I was kind of persuaded in there. I was experimenting with different things. I mean, I
Hmm.
wrote a story in the voice of a dog who saw John Lennon being shot outside the Dakota.
Interesting.
Kind of oddball stuff, but eventually settled on this because what I went through that 6 year period at SoftBank was it was a human story. A lot happened in my personal life. I lost both my parents, but equally importantly, and I think fascinating for purposes of your audience in the Valley, I was at SoftBank through an amazing period. Some of the deals we did,
Hmm.
I led the acquisition of Arm Holdings, was alongside Masa, kind of by his side, driving strategy for Arm, which is just proud of what Arm is now become. This has been an amazing deal, and it's a fantastic company, and I'm happy to unpack that a little bit more. The merger of T-Mobile, Sprint, and then the creation of the Vision Fund, which I
Hmm.
describe as, if you remember 2001: The Space Odyssey. In my book, I describe the creation of the Vision Fund as literally like that you remember that monolith that appears in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
opening
yeah,
scene of
yeah,
Space
yeah,
Odyssey.
yeah.
The Vision Fund was literally like that on the divide in Sand Hill Road, right? I mean, nobody knew what to make of it, right? And it changed everything. I mean,
Hmm.
for one, it was venture investing, growth investing on an unprecedented scale.
Hmm.
I talk about how Masa and I met with Doug Leone, managing partner of Sequoia, and he came in to meet with us and kind of left with this puzzled look on this face, kind of this feeling of like, this guy, Masa, that is, plays a game with which I'm not familiar. But guess what they did immediately after? I mean, I think their existing fund, Sequoia's, that is, was 2 billion, and I think in no small measure prompted by the Vision Fund. Their
Hmm.
fund and everyone else's fund was a lot bigger. Sequoia's next fund was 8 billion.
Yeah, yeah.
So it was the impact of the Vision Fund really was quite transformational for the Valley in
Yeah,
terms of the
interesting.
scale of investing.
Hmm. Now, how were you able to write this book? Did you take detailed notes when you were at SoftBank? I mean, how were you able to recreate, or was it just all in your memory? Did you have any notes that you used?
Well, a lot of it was in my memory. And since I wasn't intending on writing this book, it's not as if I was taking notes for purposes of describing these scenes. But,
Yeah.
keep in mind that, for example, if I'm describing being in Son San's dining room, I might be describing it based on how I've described it in my first meeting. But keep in mind, I was in there, probably not an exaggeration to say I was in there like at least 100 times. I'm sure it was more. So some of those scenes, some of those settings, or if I'm talking about, what it was like on the G5 I have had at my disposal. I mean, it's kind of stuff that you've done so much, I mean, so often that it was fairly easy to recreate
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
in writing.
Well, how long did it take you to write the book? And was it harder than you thought it was going to be? I mean, what was your experience writing that book?
It took me about two and a half years.
Wow.
It was hard. It was the first time I've written the book, and the challenge was to put it all down on paper and then chopping, changing, rearranging the order. Everything in the book is 100% true. The only liberty I've taken is I've rearranged the chronology a little bit so
Mm,
that it fits the emotional arc of what I went through and lands a little bit
mm,
smoother than it
mm,
might have
mm,
otherwise.
mm,
For example, the one of the last major deals I did at SoftBank was the SoftBank T-Mobile merger, but that actually happened after I went through a lot of personal trauma, which is losing
mm,
my parents,
mm,
and I just sort of reversed the order. Um, and Getting that right and really kind of cutting out the stuff that was extraneous to make the book flow. And if you read it, a lot of people have come back and told me, look, it really reads like a thriller.
mhm,
It's an
mhm,
easy read. It's a fast read. And I work really hard to make this something that slips down easy. I mean, it's funny, it's entertaining, and it's meant to read fast. The transitions, the
mhm.
way things are set up. I had to work really, really hard to make it that way. And if you're at the battery, I unpacked some of that in talking with Max and some of the techniques I used in terms of copying, emulating some of the writers that I admire.
Yeah. Now you said I know you said you didn't take the MFA to write this book. Did it turn out it was very helpful in terms of bearing to bear writing skills for crafting the book?
Enormously,
Yeah.
enormously, and I
Yeah.
and I did talk about that at that session. I mean, looking at how literary greats like Nabokov or Hemingway, the economy of words, with Nabokov, the dark comedy, with Martin Amis, British writer who you may not be familiar with, the British ironic wit. I mean, a lot of these were important influences, but equally, it is in the context of a book, kind of which I'd never done. I'd written short pieces before. Just being mindful of the emotional arc of the book, and trying to anticipate what might be going through a reader's mind, and having it land in a place that makes sense. Those were all techniques, learnings that I acquired through the program. Apart from just it was just tremendous being in there with a group of people whose backgrounds, whose experiences was just so far removed from
Mm,
my own. Right?
mm, mm.
This is New York. It's NYU, as you can imagine. I mean, this literally is the woke capital of the world, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I'm the great evil, the great capitalist, right? I mean, from the world of investment banking,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
the
yeah.
typical demographic was late 20s, majority female, left wing. And I'm not just talking about voting Bernie Sanders or Kamala Harris. I'm talking about frequently, like, we believe in Trotsky, right? I mean, like, seriously left wing, borderline communist. So but look, I mean, I learned so much from them, from the
Mm,
youngsters in the program, and equally from the professors, from Jonathan Safran Foer, David Lipsky, Hari Kunzru. I mean, just fantastic. Darren Strauss, just great writers, great human beings. I just got a tremendous amount. I got tremendous amount from
mm,
the
mm.
program.
How did the SoftBank opportunity even come to you? I mean, that's such a rare and unusual opportunity. How did that even present itself to you?
Yeah, it was a bit of an accident. It was not a job I sought or I was looking for. And it was thanks to a close friend of mine, someone I got to know professionally
Mm,
as a client at Morgan Stanley, and then develop a close personal friendship with. That's Nikesh Arora, who's now he's a well-known figure in the Valley. He used to be chief business officer at Google.
mm,
And he's chairman and CEO of Palo Alto Networks. Been phenomenally successful, transformational in terms of what he's done with Palo Alto Networks. So he joined SoftBank as the air designate to Masa Son and as the president of the company. And as I relate in the book, it happened while he and I were on a long weekend break to Ibiza. And
mm,
we'd been out and late at night. He kind of sprang this on me, and I had just tremendous amount of respect for Nikesh. Just a wonderful person to work with, to work for, just really bright, dynamic. When I met with Masa-san and loved what I saw, right? I
Mm,
mean, kind of the guy is nothing short of inspirational in terms
mm,
of how he thinks.
mm.
As a futurist, he's one of a kind, right up there with in the pantheon of Valley greats. I think up there with Steve Jobs was the others. So that's how I got into software.
Wow. And you just hit it off with him just like that. You guys just hit it off right from the very beginning, would you say?
Well, with Nikesh, we had a history, right? So that was straightforward. With Masa, I got to know him and developed trust. He saw me in action in the context of a few deals, and then with when Nikesh left, and I described that in the book because there was an understanding that Nikesh would succeed Masa, and when it became apparent that Masa wasn't about to let go anytime soon. Nikesh moved on. Kind of after a hiatus, he moved on to Palo Alto Networks. He really wanted to be, as he should be, for someone as talented as he is. He wanted to run his own show, and at that point, I got elevated by Son and worked with him even more closely than had been the case previously to
Mm,
start off with the ARM acquisition.
mm.
And it was a relationship that grew. It's a relationship that evolved.
Now, I've interviewed a lot of authors, and every one of them said writing a book ends up being way more work than they thought. So I want to ask you the same thing. And if you knew how much work was involved, would you still have done it?
Absolutely. I tell you what's been really rewarding. I mean, you have to judge. That question has to be in the context of what did you get out of it, right?
Mm.
It's not money. It's I'm not going to make much money out of it. I shouldn't say that because it is from a if you're a journalist writing a book, you do make a lot of money. But let's after a almost 40-year career in the world of finance and technology, this is not going to move my dial. And in any
Yeah,
case, the
yeah.
money is going to go to I have a clear view of where the money is going to go in terms of the cause I want to support. So for me, the reward really has been, it's not even the reviews or being on a bestseller list or whatever. It's the outreach I've had from
Mm,
people all
mm,
over who feel touched, somehow moved by the
mm,
book.
mm, mm,
And it's ranged from kind of Wall Street titans who come back and who've said in writing, unsolicited people I don't know reached out and said, look, you made me question my life and some of the choices I
mm,
made,
mm.
to people who've lost parents, to immigrants who said what you wrote about your journey as an Indian immigrant, I really relate to. Um, Others who amazingly, again, this is a little bit from India, when youngsters sort of I find your story as an immigrant inspirational for all kinds of different reasons. Others just purely appreciate the insight into Masa-san and
Mm.
SoftBank and my observations on the world of technology investing. I mean, it is was Masa an idealist? Are technology investors idealists? How far have they come from? The Edisons of the world, where technology was all about making the world a better place, to creating social networks, which I have a fairly cynical view on, right? And the people who are motivated by my last round evaluation, or who are at kind of in some cases outright charlatans, and there's been a few of those fairly prominent cases in the valley too. It's a commentary on that landscape too, which a lot of people find very, very interesting.
Mm, mm. Well, what's the future of Alok Sama now? You've obviously done SoftBank. You've written this fantastic book. What is the future for you, and what are you working on these days?
While I want to write more, for sure, I am heartened by how this has been received purely as
Oh,
a writing project,
mm,
getting away from the insights and the reactions. And I want to do more. I'm determined to do more. I do have maintained linkages with the world of technology and technology investing. I chair the advisory board of a small venture fund called Valhalla Ventures.
mm,
A couple of incredibly bright young guys, and we've done some interesting deals together. And I'm still affiliated with Warburg Pincus as a senior advisor, and those
mm.
guys low key under the radar, but they have a phenomenal track record, particularly in the SaaS space as technology investors. So a mix of things is the answer to your question.
Are you thinking about dabbling in some fiction? Will I see a fiction book by you in
Absolutely,
the
and more
future?
than dabbling. Yes, I do want to write fiction. Yeah, it's so much more fun. You have less accountability, right? I mean, if with the problem with a memoir, as much as I enjoyed writing this book, and and it is a fun book, or so they tell me otherwise. So they tell me anyway. Is at the back of my mind, you always have, well, I'm describing this person, or what he said, or what he did, and what are they going to think, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
there's always an element of that.
yeah, yeah.
You know, what's
Well,
Mark Zuckerberg? I mean, not that I think he's going to read my book, but what is he going to think of the way I talk about him?
well, will there be a mathematician in your fiction novel?
It could be. Who knows?
Well, look, this has been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate your taking the time and sharing your story. When you do publish that fiction novel, please come back and tell me about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Richard. It's been a pleasure.
This is Richard Hsu and Alok Sama. Thanks.